Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
Quite frankly, I get most of my news from you.
Joan Esposito.
Y'all ready for this?
On WCPT 820.
Hey, thanks for being here this Thursday, December 5th. I know the AP at the top of the hour told you about a big tsunami that they were worried would hit Northern California, maybe some Southern Oregon. That tsunami warning has been lifted. It has been rescinded. No tsunami warning. Because of the big quake just in the ocean off of Eureka, California, which is way north, they thought that there was a possibility for a tsunami. They were expecting said tsunami would arrive by our time, 2:10 in the afternoon. Nothing appears to be happening. So that tsunami warning is now over. It is rescinded. All the people who evacuated Eureka, California, and there were thousands of them, can now return to their homes. So that is good news. We know that earthquakes, especially when they happen in the ocean, sometimes when they happen on land, and if you can get a bad earthquake and the force can travel for the ocean, and then a tsunami is created at a body of land potentially thousands of miles away. And obviously, if there's an earthquake in the water, you worry about whatever landmass is nearby. But it depends on, earthquakes are a science unto themselves, and there's all different kinds of ways they happen. We always report the magnitude. This one in the ocean was a magnitude 7, which is a biggie. That's a big boy. So that's when you worry. But since nobody was under the ocean to actually watch it happen and see how the plates moved and what went where and how much water was or was not displaced, all we can say is that when we have a big earthquake at a certain location, it puts other locations at risk for a tsunami. Hence the warning, which has now been canceled. So the Northern California, Southern Oregon folks can breathe a sigh of relief and get back to business as usual. I've been getting Cook County warnings about snow and ice and wind. Those are in place till tonight. So you should always be aware of what's going on here as well. Couple of local things that I want to get to before we focus on anything national. By the way, I have the phone lines open, 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. Lady B is waiting to take your calls, and hopefully we'll be talking soon. A couple of local things that I want to touch on. Apparently, the Reverend Jesse Jackson has sent a letter to Joe Biden, the gist of which is, hey, if you're going to be pardoning people, sure would be nice if you pardon Jesse Jackson Jr. and his ex-wife. They did their time. To be clear, Joe, it has been reported that the Biden administration is considering preemptive federal pardons for people like Liz Cheney, people who have been identified, especially by Kash Patel, as enemies. Kash Patel, it was reported at one point, said something like, if he can get into government, he's going to do everything in his power to make sure that Hunter Biden goes to federal prison for years. And because we do not have a normal president coming in the next term, there's every reason to believe that a Donald Trump would let Kash Patel go after his enemies. Olivia Troy is on his enemies list. She has said before in interviews since Trump was elected that if if she feels that his administration is going to come after her, she's got her passport ready. She's ready to leave the country. She will live elsewhere. That is why he pardoned Hunter Biden. It wasn't simply that if anybody else had done what Hunter did, they would have gotten either a pass, a slap on the wrist. But no, he went to trial. He was already treated to a standard that other people who have committed similar instances have not been. And there's every reason to believe that, hell, Biden himself is on the enemy's list. Kash Patel would love nothing than to go after Joe Biden. So these preemptive pardons, I really hope Joe Biden's doing it. I absolutely hope Joe Biden is doing it. But that's kind of not the situation with the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson Jr. Apparently has said that it feels to him, he was charged with, he misspent campaign funds, like $750,000. He bought himself a Rolex watch and did some other things that legally you are not allowed to do with campaign funds. He served time in a federal prison. So he did the crime, he did the time, but he said that he can't, nobody will hire him. Nobody will hire him. He's losing his house. And his statement was, and there's a lot of validity to this, that what he did should not end up being a life sentence. And while I understand that completely, the situation is a little bit different. And I think that what we need to do is we need to make sure that people who have done the time and are unlikely to be repeat offenders, there should be programs in place. There should be support in place. And I understand that if you're a landlord and you have a choice between renting to somebody with no criminal record and renting to somebody who's a convicted felon, that, I understand the decision you're going to make. And Jesse Jackson Jr. is right. He should not be subject to a life sentence. But the kind of pardon, the kind of concern that Jesse Jackson Sr. is asking of Joe Biden is different than the kind of pardons he's considering. There are potentially going to be illegal, politically based prosecutions of people. And even if no judge in the land convicts them, it is very expensive to defend yourself in court. It is emotionally draining, and it is wildly expensive. Somebody charges you with a crime, you've got to hire attorneys, and good ones are not cheap. So even if they go after a Liz Cheney and no court will convict her, she will still be harmed just by the prosecution itself. So I hope Joe Biden is putting together a list of preemptive pardons. He doesn't have to announce it. Remember when Donald Trump left office and people were speculating that prosecutors would go after his kids and potentially him and a lot of his cronies? There were rumors that he had written pardons for everybody. You don't have to tell the world about it. They can be secret. And then, a year after Trump's out of office, prosecutors come after Ivanka, and maybe Jared. That they can whip out these pardons and say, nope. So I hope he's doing that. But like I said, Jesse Jackson has sent a letter to Joe Biden asking the that his former daughter-in-law and his son be recipients of Biden pardons. Also, one other local bit of news. You know, there's been an ongoing battle between Pedro Martinez, who's CEO of Chicago Public Schools, and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson. Brandon Johnson wanted to get the teachers' contract done. There was a financial shortfall, so Brandon Johnson wanted to do what is essentially people are referring to as a payday loan, a short-term loan at very high interest to cover the balance that can't be covered any other way. And Pedro Martinez said, no, that's fiscally irresponsible. I won't do it. And ever since then, Brandon Johnson has been trying to get rid of him. His school board members, they all resigned en masse one day because of the pressure they were getting from the mayor to fire Pedro Martinez. Now there's a temporary board in place. They offered Pedro Martinez a buyout. Okay. We can't get rid of you any other way. Maybe if we throw enough money at you, you'll walk away willingly. Well, it hasn't been announced today that Pedro Martinez has said no to a buyout. There is one more meeting of the current board. It is going to be on the 15th. And then in January, the board will be the new board, which is half elected, half appointed by the mayor. The thinking was that both Stacey David Gates and Brandon Johnson wanted to get this new contract done before the new board comes in January. Because half of the board has been elected, the mayor won't have as much influence as he has, at least in theory now. So it continues. There's been some talk about somehow trying to put more pressure on Springfield, on the state of Illinois, to cover some of these budget shortfalls. Governor Pritzker has been resistant to that. He has also, while not calling out anybody by name, he has said that the idea of short-term loans, that's never a good way to balance your budget. So the plot thickens. All righty. Well, you know what? I've talked for a little bit. Let's take a break. Let's start in with your calls and other news of the day when we come right back after this.
The Hal Sparks radio program.
Ladies and gentlemen, Clarence Thomas has been getting these free trips, some of them at the cost of $500,000. He was a guest of a man named Harlan Crow. Sounds like quite frankly, a plantation owner. Colonel Harlan Crow of the Mississippi Crows. Simmer down, they're making too much noise, darling. We can't enjoy our mint juleps.
Hal Sparks, Saturdays from 11 to 1 on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk. WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
We spend the first hour of the show talking and taking your calls. Remember, tomorrow's Friday, so we will spend the first half of the show taking your calls. Oh, and I want to let you know at 3 o'clock today, we have David Hochberg coming in. He's going to be spending an hour talking to us. If you have questions, and I know we get a lot of this, a lot of questions when David comes in. So you know what? Why don't you right now, if you have a question about your credit or a family member's credit rating, if you have questions about refinancing, or if you have questions about mortgages, please send me a text on that, okay? If you want to call in while David's on the air, that's great. That's great. We'd love to put you on the air. So terrific. If you do not have the time to talk on the radio but still would like to listen and get your question answered, shoot me a text. It's the same number, 773-763-9278. 773-763-9278. Shoot your question for David Hochberg to our text line. I will start writing them down, and we can get all of your questions answered in the 3 to 4 o'clock hour today. Let's go to the phone lines now. Dennis is on the line from Evanston. Hey, Dennis, thanks for the call.
Hey, Joan, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I spoke to you a couple of weeks back, right before I went to Greece before the election. And you said, call when I got back, and I've been so disappointed. And I have tried a couple of times, but it's been very difficult. Today I got through. And so to go back, and you said, talk to people. And so basically what had happened was while I was there, I ended up talking to a number of people. And one of the most interesting ones was I had two young kids from Germany I was staying in the hostel, and they were very concerned about an election where Trump would be the winner. And they really understood a lot of stuff about tariffs and the NATO alliance, all that stuff. And they were 17 and 18 years old.
Wow.
And I venture to guess that Americans of 17 and 18 years old don't have the same knowledge that they did. Now, on the other side of the coin, I ran into some guy from Canada who said that Trump was the greatest president ever, and he believes that the Democratic Party is filled with all kinds of bad people, pedophiles, and the whole 9 yards. And so that brings us up to today. I was very disappointed while I was in Greece of the election results. And what the reality is that the people who are Trump supporters that I know are completely blind to the fact that, okay, he won the electoral vote, and we know that that's something that's antiquated and probably should be gone, but, that's not going to happen. And he did get a popular vote. But in the popular vote, it was like 1.5%. And they're calling this a landslide, and they believe it no matter what. And I had somebody question me about Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard, and there was somebody else whose name wasn't familiar to me at the time. But anyway, the question that I was asked was, do you support these people being put into positions of power? And I said, I don't support somebody who puts out a hit list of 60 or more people that he wants to go after as the head of the FBI, or someone who is on TSA watch list for their, time going to Russia and could be considered a Russian asset. And those are people who are not in line with the American people. Okay, or at least the America I'm used to. And the response this young man gave me, and he's not super young, he's probably in his 40s. He said that I was racist because I was not listening. I was not supporting these people. I said I don't support people who have these things, right? And that's how the right, at least this portion of them that was enough to push this over the top this time, are working. And I don't know what our answers are as Democrats or progressives or just people who want to live a decent, good life without our neighbors being drug out of their houses, whether they're legal or illegal or not, or, somebody going after MSNBC because they don't like the politics they talk about on air. And I think it's super important that somehow, and I don't know how it's going to be done, but the Democratic Party, the progressives, whatever is going to go on, is we need to get this message out to these low information voters. And I mean, a couple of people I know who are Jewish, and I say, here are Nazis marching down the street in Columbus, Ohio, in support of Trump, and they're like, "That's fake." Oh my God! Right? And so, and there just seems to be this really block of this 33% is the number that I've heard, like on Tom Hartman and stuff. But there's this 33% of dyed in the wool MAGA that will not make a change or cannot see anything through any of this. If you support science, you're woke and you're ridiculous.
Oh, God.
And stuff. And then I'm going to just drop this little thing in there about Pete Hesford, who's like, well, I won't drink a drop if I'm nominated.
Yeah, I'll go into AA if you give me this job. Yeah, I don't think that's how it works.
No, and here's the thing: is his behavior, and I'm a recovering alcoholic, and his behavior might be somebody who's an alcoholic, and you don't make promises like that. You can't do it, and anybody who believes that somebody who is possibly an alcoholic is making those promises, they're fooling themselves, and in this case, trying to fool the rest of the American people, and we've got to get our ducks in a row. That's all I got.
Well, that's really interesting. I'm particularly impressed with the 17-year-olds who understood what tariffs are. I'm beginning to think that we have a real problem with how we educate our population, because it just seems like you were saying, if you tell me something, Dennis, that I don't like, I'll tell you it's fake, because, that's just the easiest way for me to keep thinking what I want to think. We don't teach media literacy. We don't apparently teach critical thinking skills. I know we have some of the best educational institutions in the world, but we seem to have an increasingly ignorant, uneducated populace. I don't know how. I think, you always talk about root causes when you talk about some problem. Yeah. I think the root causes of Trumpism are a population that wasn't inoculated for disinformation. They didn't figure out, how to figure out what's reliable, what's not, when to be suspicious, when not, when somebody makes sense, when they don't. Yeah. We got to do better. We've got to do better.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. And if you think about it in terms of, this whole thing that, Trump has put forth, or the MAGAs, Make America Great Again. Okay, when America, and we're not on the top rung of education right now in the world, but when we were, that was when public schools were the best. Public schools. And if somebody wanted to send their kid to Andover, Choate, Blair Academy, whatever it was, that was their choice as upper crust people, right? That they could do that. But our public school education was tops in the world. And that was one of those times when you talk about America being great. And what these MAGA people are doing is they want to take away money from the public school system and put it into vouchers and private schools or Christian schools. And that's not making America great again.
Yeah.
Look at your history. Look at your history, people.
Yeah, Dennis, I've got to go. We're going to do a commercial break. But thank you for that report. I'm really glad you called back with that.
I'm glad to be there. And David Hopper is the best because he's the one who got my credit score up. He didn't do anything. I just listened to what he said.
Oh, so I will tell him that.
Okay?
Okay. Take care. We're going to take a break. We're going to be back with more calls and more news right after this.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
We spend the first hour of the show taking your calls and talking about the news of the day. There is reporting, the newsletter called The Hill. Obviously, they focus on everything going on nationally, about how, we've been focusing a lot on Pete Hegseth and how utterly irresponsible a choice he is to lead the military. According to this reporting, Tulsi Gabbard is also in for a very tough confirmation. Tulsi Gabbard is the former Democrat turned Republican, very, very friendly with Russia human being, who Trump has tapped to be in charge of national intelligence. According to reporting in The Hill, the aides who spoke to this reporter from the Republican Party, these are GOP aides, told the reporter that Gabbard has a tougher way to go than Hegseth. And I told you, I think Hegseth's going to step back. I mean, when you're supposedly Donald Trump is telling Hegseth, oh, you're a fighter, you get in there and fight. But one thing Trump did for Matt Gaetz that he is not doing for Pete Hegseth, he's not getting on the phones. When Matt Gaetz' nomination was getting a lot of pushback, Donald Trump picked up the phone and was calling legislators on Gaetz' behalf. He is not only not doing that for Hegseth, he is interviewing people for Hegseth's replacement. There was first, he kind of likes the idea of Ron DeSantis, even though they hate each other's guts. But Ron DeSantis supposedly is quite willing to make Trump's daughter-in-law, Laura, a senator, a U.S. senator. Take that Marco Rubio seat and stick her right in there. So Trump's really thinking about that. Iowa Senator Joni Ernst has also been floated as a possible head of the military. She was cornered. The senators have to walk out of their offices when they're leaving. And that walkway, that particular hallway is, you reporters generally just sort of line up so they can try to do interviews with all these people. So Joni Ernst was asked that she had met with Pete. And they were like, well, you met with Pete Hegseth today. Are you going to vote for him? Are you going to vote to confirm him? And she just looked at the reporter and she said, we had an interesting and far-reaching conversation. And she walked away. And as the hosts on MSNBC said, folks, that's a no. That is not a senator who is going to vote for Hegseth. So we will see what happens. But in this article on The Hill, Republican aides are saying people are much more worried about Tulsi Gabbard than they are about Hegseth. One Republican aide spoke to this reporter from The Hill and said, behind closed doors, people think she might be compromised. Like it's not hyperbole. There are members of our conference who think she's a Russian asset. Nobody, not just the best people. He's got nothing but the best people. Let's go to the phone lines. Greg from Lake in the Hills is on the line. Hello, Greg. How are you today?
Afternoon, Joan. How are you?
Peachy.
Excellent. I was calling about the subject of, or the topic of tariffs. Or not tariffs, I apologize, the pardons. And on these pardons, I think the thing that's different than there used to be is that everybody's in fear that he's going to go after people the Trump administration and his acolytes, they're all out there raising these possibilities that they're going to go, in fact, they're going to go after people and they're going to prosecute them and possibly even put them to death. Okay. Now, when I hear that kind of thing, for example, Kash Patel's got a book out where he's got this enemies list in there, which has quite a few people's names. If I did this or you did this or anybody else went out there and they talked about these peoples, and I'm sure he skirts the law, but where are the organizations like the CIA and the FBI in terms of watching what's taking place in the country? And then at this point in time of our existence, why isn't the CIA, knowing that the Russians are deeply involved in this, the Chinese are involved in this, trying to basically support Trump in the takeover, the overthrow of our government? Whether or not it actually happens, and I know a lot of people probably don't share my, they think probably I'm naive or something, but I truly think that these guys are telling us exactly what they're going to do, and if we let them get that far. In other words, if the FBI and the CIA are not going to do something about it, the only other way is Joe Biden, like I've said. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, they got to step up and declare a national emergency, arrest Trump, I call it a million-man list, a million-person list. Take the steps. They should have already been doing it with the help of the FBI and so forth. I know it sounds extreme, but these are extreme times. And if we don't do it, we're going to be overthrown. And I sure as heck don't want to see Steve Bannon on my nightly TV telling us about all the people that were put in front of firing squads.
Yeah, I think that you make a very good point in that we have to take them at their word. This whole idea, that's just Trump being Trump, they won't really do it. We learned the first time that everything Trump said he was going to do, he did, and worse. So this idea that somehow he's not going to be that bad, I think that he figured out who and what agencies got in his way before, and he's learned that the way to do whatever he wants, whenever he wants to, is to only put Trump loyalists. They don't have to be experienced. They don't have to be competent. But if they are loyal to Trump, they get to lead agencies. That way Trump picks up the phone, he tells them what to do, and they do it. And don't think that he isn't wrestling with the Republicans in the Senate right now, because he wants them to be under his thumb. And some of the reasons for these really outlandish appointments, he thinks he can pressure the Republicans in the Senate to go along with whatever he wants. And once they've done it, he's got them. Once they've done it, he knows they'll do it again. I think you're very right. I think we have to believe everything that they are saying, because I think they intend to do it. Greg, thank you so much for the call. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Joan.
Thank you. We have a call from Mississippi. Mary is on the line. Hey, Mary, thanks for the call today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you, and I enjoy your show so much. It's so informative, and I'm glad you're feeling better, and you sound better, too.
Thanks. I'm getting there.
Well, what I was calling about was, I was thinking that if I lived in another country and I was smart enough to get in college over here in the USA, and they were saying that a lot of the international students come from other countries, I wouldn't be coming over here with all the negativity towards foreign students and everything. And I would think that would mess with our economy. Don't you think so?
I think that our economy is going to get messed with in a lot of ways. That probably will be a drop in the bucket. But I think all the experts looked at what Trump wanted to do business-wise, financial-wise, and they said we're going to get higher prices, higher inflation. He's going to wreck the economy. And I think, what you're talking about could be a tiny part of that. But I think, things like the tariffs and the various policies and letting corporations dictate the regulations that govern them, I think we're in for a tough time, Mary.
Well, I mean it in terms of students, too, but America is a travel destination for tourists, so why would you if you come over here to Disney World, maybe, and your wife is, she may be pregnant, may not know she's pregnant, end up in the hospital, what can happen to you? So I don't know. We don't know what's not known. But once everything starts to shake out, I just think, like the United States would say, don't go to Cuba, don't go to Russia. Mm-hmm. They may be saying, don't go to the United States.
Wouldn't surprise me a bit.
We didn't vote for this, but we didn't vote for this. I mean, I feel like that old movie, The Man Without a Country, we didn't vote for this. We didn't vote for evil, but evil is what's going to be out there, and I'm afraid it's going to be for a long time. But that's my comment, and I appreciate you listening to me.
Thank you, Mary.
And I enjoy your show.
Thank you so much. We are going to take a break. We're going to be back with more after this.
Take Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, with you on the go by using the TuneIn app on your phone. Just search for WCPT 820.
This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I want to thank you, listeners who have been texting in with questions for the lovely and talented David Hochberg, who will be joining me in the 3 o'clock hour. I am making note of those, and I will make sure that we ask him all of your questions. In the meantime, we are taking your calls as we do the first hour of every show, talking about the news of the day. Let's go to Charles, who's calling in from Shorewood. Hello, Charles.
Hi, John. All right. I actually grew up in Wooddale, which is right next to Bensenville, and we shared a public high school, Fenton. And in junior high and elementary school, we had in Wooddale, we had very good civics, lessons, and, I remember them all to this day. And in high school, we had the 1-year civics course, and what they did there was unconscionable. They took 3 classes, shoved them all into what had been a large room, which they converted to a classroom, and had one teacher teaching and the other 2 grading papers. And how anybody learned anything in there was remarkable. And this was in 1987, 1988. And it's not gotten any better, I'm sure.
No.
And you wonder how we're this way, because Republicans have been getting into the school boards since the 1970s, and this was all part of the Powell memo.
Yeah. For a while, there was this idea that, we're teaching too many things that aren't just the basics. Our kids need to be better at math and better at English and, all this other stuff like, civics and stuff like that. That's just extraneous. We need to...
But yet now we have everybody denying science and denying math. So, you know what? Civics and, actually applied science, it's very important.
Yeah, no kidding. I guess we found out the hard way.
Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it.
Yep. And we don't seem to be learning much, do we?
do have the Great Depression, too, brought to us by the Republican Party and Trump. And we're on target for it to be the 100-year anniversary, that hits. So, way to go.
Yeah. I just don't know. We seem to have really lost our way. And, the greatest generation, supposedly, as they're called, the people who lived through World War II, and now most of them have left us. They've passed on. I just think, I look at those people and what they sacrificed and what they believed in, and the way they held people to account. And we are just not that people anymore. We really aren't.
Well, okay, they didn't hold people to account until they were forced to. As Winston Churchill said, Americans will always do the right thing after they've tried everything else first.
So and maybe that's just who we are then.
Unfortunately, COVID gave Trump a little bit of time for him to not crash the economy, because his policies were crashing the economy in 2019, 2020. But because of COVID and all the restrictions and everything, he got a mulligan. He got a pass on it. And now everybody's actually hearing and seeing what's going on, what's about to happen, and people are scared. Yeah. People are angry when they realize, oh, wait, he was serious?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Oh, gosh, he told us what he was going to do, and then he did it? Oh, my God. Yeah. Yeah.
But he's a big liar. He's a big fat liar. We all know this.
He's a lying liar who lies.
Except when he wants to do mean, despicable things. Then he's telling the God's honest truth.
Yeah.
Could be because he's evil. Just a thought. But anyway.
Yeah. Charles, thank you so much for the call.
Have a lovely weekend, Joni.
You too. You too. Let's go back to the phone lines. We're going to go to Des Plaines. Nikki is on the line. Hey, Nikki, how are you?
Great. I just want to remind everybody that as a group, people do have power, and we have to not get too down that we don't remember that there are going to be opportunities where we can show that power. And as an example, let's say there's some really bizarre anti-abortion laws that are going to be passed. Maybe the OBs will all go on strike. There's potential out there for us to maybe be a little bit like what happened in South Korea, where if there's that much disgust with what's happening, it can induce change. And we just have to be vocal, and we have to be out there.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And I think that there's going to be, as in the previous Trump term, there's going to be a fire hose of outrageousness. And I think part of the reason that they do that, aside from the fact that they want to do a bunch of really crazy things, part of the reason they do that is because they want to wear you down. And frankly, the media did get worn down. I mean, in the reporting, in the lead up to this election, if Joe Biden had done 30% of the crazy things that Donald Trump did, it would have been front page news. But it's, that's Trump being Trump. They got used to it. And that's what the fire hose of outrageousness is going to try to accomplish with us, so that we get used to it. So that's why I tell people, pick your causes, what's near and dear to your heart, and focus on that, and give it as much energy as you can. Because otherwise, if you try to fight the whole fire hose, you're just going to go down. Nikki, that's a great idea. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Let's go to our good friend Ron from Chicago, who is on the line. Hey, Ron.
How you doing? Yes, I heard a story today. I don't know if it's true or not, but the story is that Elon Musk is publicly giving out the names of federal employees who he thinks.
Oh, yeah. No, I read that. I read that last week. He is, if he thinks you're a federal employee and he doesn't think your job should exist, he doxes these people. I mean, he doesn't, as far as I know so far, he doesn't give out home addresses, so maybe doxing's the wrong word here, but he has named them by name in his Twitter feed. Like, Mary Smith, is like head of crisis management over at this agency. That's like a nothing burger job without ever really investigating what's involved. Yeah, no, he has, there have been federal workers who have been named by him in his social media who say that they are now afraid for their safety. They're afraid that some of the crazies, because it isn't the average person, but if you're really, really rabid into conspiracy theories, if you suffer from mental illness, you can take this stuff to heart in a way that is not normal, and you can do things that are not normal. And these people, that is happening, and these people are afraid.
Yeah, they're getting death threats over there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, well, and some happy news. The Pope is getting a electric Pope-mobile.
Well, good. Excellent. I honestly didn't realize that the Pope-mobile, because it looks like a golf cart. I guess I just figured it ran on batteries. But if it didn't, I'm glad they're changing over.
Right, good. All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ron. I just want to remind you one more time that after the news at the top of the hour, we are going to be joined by David Hochberg. So you can use the phone lines after 3 to talk with David and ask him your questions. If you want to try to figure out how to raise your credit score the way Dennis said he did, give us a call and talk to David Hochberg. Ask him your questions. And you can, of course, send me those questions for David on the text line, and I am copying those down as we speak, and I will be asking David your questions that have come through on the text line as soon as we get started with him. So if you want to, well, if you want to talk to me or leave a text or for David, 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. And after I start to talk with David, I will still keep an eye on the text line. So if you aren't able to text till after 3, I will try to catch that and make sure he sees it. One last news bit. We've talked about some of the outrageous people that Donald Trump says he wants in his cabinet. But there is a case that has come before the Supreme Court. They are hearing arguments on it now. It's coming out of Tennessee, whether or not the state can ban gender-affirming care for minors. Now, this is not based on any kind of consultations with the medical community or with families. This is how the Republican Party works. They want you not, as Robert Reich, the economist formerly in, I think it was the Clinton administration, maybe it was Obama, he said that they don't want you to focus on the fact that corporations are about to get huge tax breaks, and that the billionaire class is going to get wealthier and wealthier. They want you distracted. They want you distracted by that, and they want you divided. So let's focus on trans people. Ooh, trans people. Let's focus on how we all hate trans people, right? Then maybe we won't pay attention to the deregulation and the increased taxes and the worsening economy. Because, trans people. On CNN, Zoe Zephyr, who's a Democrat from Missoula, was interviewed. Zoe Zephyr is a trans person. She's a transgender female legislator in Montana. And CNN was talking to her about this whole thing. And, she thinks, strangely enough, that rather than worrying about what bathroom somebody uses, that legislators should be worried about governing. Nancy Mace, we've got an openly trans member of Congress, and Nancy Mace has said, I don't want to be in the same bathroom as her. And Zoe Zephyr would say to Nancy Mace, rather than worrying about trans people, maybe there are more pressing things you should be worried about. Maybe you should actually be worried about making life better for your constituents. Listen to Zoe Zephyr talking about the more pressing things that she thinks should take precedence.
In Montana, you watched a measure that would have banned you from using the women's restroom at the state capitol fail in committee yesterday after a few Republicans actually voted against it. You've been in the state Senate for almost 2 years at this point. So what do you make of that timing?
I think it's obviously falling on the heels of Congresswoman Mace's efforts to ban Congresswoman-elect McBride from the bathrooms in the Capitol building. And I think there's a subset of the Republican Party who believes that they found a winning issue with the electorate and so are going to push this culture war. What I see is from my colleagues on the Republican side, many of them recognize that this is a distraction. This isn't what we were sent to our legislatures to do. And for the folks who are on the right trying to craft a law that would specifically ban me from using a restroom that I used with my Republican female colleagues without issue in the last 2 years, to me it's just it's a grab to try to villainize trans people in a moment where there's a lot more pressing things that our country should be focusing on.
Another point that Zoe Zephyr made in that conversation is that regardless of how many laws are passed, trans people are not going away. But Republicans don't really care whether they go away or not. I mean, they need an issue to get people riled up about. If you're concentrating all your energy on the trans community, you're not paying attention to the rest of what's happening. We're going to take a break for news. Our good friend David Hochberg is going to be here answering your questions when we come right back.
You're the only voice of reason on the radio.
You give me hope.
Having listened to you every day.
Thank you for your clear insight.
Always felt a little bit smarter.
I listen to you every single day.
I keep coming back to this station, and thank you for what you do.
On WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
You're listening to WCPT 820, because facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
The reason that I listen to you from the infamous other side, you will call a spade, and if it's indefensible, you will not defend it. And you know what? I can respect that.
On WCPT 820.
I am so pleased to welcome back to our program the lovely David Hochberg. David, how are you? Did you have a nice Thanksgiving?
I'm outstanding. I just set my alarm off on my phone. That's me, man.
Okay.
Great Thanksgiving. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, do you any other, you need to shut that alarm off? Any other, housekeeping? You need to get a cushion to sit on? Anything else you need to do before we get going here?
I'm in a loaner car, and I don't know what buttons I'm pushing there.
So, that's great.
I'm fine.
Okay. That's good. By the way, I want you to know that I was taking calls to talk about the news of the day, and as my conversation with Dennis from Evanston wrapped up, he said that he wanted to let me know that you had helped him raise his credit score. And I was like, oh, did you talk to him? He goes, no, just listening to him on your show with the advice he gives for how to raise your credit score. He said, I did it, and it worked. So he was very grateful, and he wanted me to thank you on his behalf.
Dennis is very, very welcome. I'm glad we're able to help him out. So that's great.
And you know what? We've said it before, but if somebody at home is in the same situation as Dennis, walk through with the things that you do to get your credit score back up.
Sure. Number one, if you can, pay your credit cards off every single week. Don't wait for the bill to come, because then you'll only keep it at 1 week's worth of charges, which will help keep your balances down, your availability up. And the higher the availability and the lower the balances, the better your credit scores. Another thing that you could do is get added to somebody's credit card that has good credit as an authorized user, and go along for the ride with the good borrower, get all their credit history. Another thing that your listeners could do is open up a secured credit card, a Team Hochberg secured credit card, if they're credit challenged or are coming out of a bankruptcy and are looking to reestablish their credit.
Oh, David, I don't know if you can hear me, but that your loaner card just cut you off. So Lady B's calling you again so we can reestablish that. I know from personal experience, Dennis, I have also used David's techniques to raise my credit score. And paying off your credit cards, I don't do it every week, but I'll try to do it twice a month. As a matter of fact, it's really weird. My MasterCard, when I was setting up automatic payment, it gave me the option of paying it every 2 weeks instead of once a month, which I thought was brilliant. So I clicked that little button, and now I'm paying it off every other week, and don't even have to remember to log back on again. So if you decide to put some of these ideas into place, look for that. When you, like, I like to do automatic debit because I don't have to write checks. I don't have to think about it. If you've got the option of doing it more than once a month, click the button. Oh, my God, it's so easy. Unfortunately, at least last time I checked, I did not have that option with my Visa, but my MasterCard for sure gave me that option. So how's that loaner car working out for you so far, David?
Oh, it's great. It's outstanding. I'm setting alarms off and it's dropping my calls. So here, I got cut off in the middle. If you are trying to establish your credit or don't have any credit, or just came out of a bankruptcy, or you're 18 or 20 years old and lived off your credit cards, lived off your debit cards, a secured credit card is an outstanding way to get back up and or just established in the grid if you've never been in the grid before. If you had trouble with credit cards in the past and you swore them off because it was the credit cards that got you into trouble, which is not the case, okay, and you want to get back to having some type of credit profile, a $500 secured credit card, Team Hochberg secured credit card. We don't make any money on this, Joan. It's just helpful. It gets everybody back on the grid to hopefully help them get into a home sometime in the future. That's the angle on these secured credit cards. You pull out the credit card, my logo's on it, and it's all through Kane County Teachers Credit Union. And here's the key. Kane County Teachers Credit Union has a distinct footprint here in the great state of Illinois. Okay, but the great thing is we've been approved from the Illinois Department of Professional Regulations to be, I forgot the proper term, an affiliated partner, I think is the term, or it might not be the term, but we can refer them clients from all over the United States that are out of the KCTCU, Kane County Teachers Credit Union footprint. And as long as we're being the one that's doing the introducing and you're coming through our channel, you could be in Bangor, Maine or Portland, Oregon. It doesn't matter. You could still get their products, which are outstanding. So I just wanted to put that out there because I always advise the listeners to please contact me first so I can make the introduction. And they go directly to KCTCU and they're like, well, you live in Seattle, Washington, and you're out of our footprint and we can't help you. But if I made the introduction because of the agreement we have with the IDFPR with KCTCU, I know it's alphabet soup, but you're able to secure their products, which is all that we're trying to do. We're just trying to help your listeners either lower their monthly payments, establish their credit, set themselves up for success in the future. I'm glad we were able to help Dennis in Evanston. Was that his name? I remember Evanston.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Yeah, I'm glad Dennis has used the techniques that are proven and are not proprietary. Anybody could use them and has implemented them in his daily life, and it enhanced his credit. That's phenomenal.
That is phenomenal. We've got a quick question, and I'm pretty sure you've answered this one before. Do you do out-of-state mortgages?
Yes, My company is licensed in 45 states, and the other 5 states that we're not licensed in, I have relationships with men and women, loan officers at big banks who are licensed in the states that I'm not licensed in. That I think it's 5 or 6 states we're not licensed in. That I trust, that I refer over to them, and they take care of the listener. But it's pretty much all the major states that we deal with, so we are licensed in.
Okie dokie. Another question here. My credit score is low.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the grammar here is a little strange. Let me see if I can get this.
Well, they're typing on the cell phone most of the time. I get that, too, on my show.
My credit score is low. His home needs a lot of upgrades.
Okay.
He owes $35,000 on his home, which certainly doesn't seem like much.
That's a great place. Yeah, that's great.
So what are his options? He wants to obviously do some rehabbing, but his credit score is low.
Right. Okay. So on something like that, securing a line of credit is going to be tough because the credit scores for the line of credit are typically more restrictive than securing a mortgage, right? But we would take a look at that first because that typically is the lowest cost option for the listener. And if that doesn't work out, then the other option is, depending upon how low his credit scores are, you do an FHA loan, and you take an FHA loan out to do the work that extract the equity out of the texter's home. Hopefully there's enough equity in there for them to take out. And hopefully the property's in good enough shape where it'll pass inspection, right? Or the next option is a construction loan. But again, a construction loan with not so great credit, they don't go hand in hand, right? It's kind of like oil and water. So the first step would be to contact me at 855-563-2843. The consultation is free. There's no cost. We'll do a free analyzation. We'll analyze the situation and see what the best path is. It might take 6-8 months for the texter to be in a better position to do something if we enhance his credit. If the credit is so poor at this time, it doesn't mean that it will be poor in the future. So we might have to do a little bit of a credit rehab on the texter, get the texter in a better position to succeed, and then connect him with the right parties to help him extract the equity that he hopefully has in his home to do the work that he wants to do.
Okie dokie. We have more questions, but I think we should probably take a break. I'm talking to David Hochberg. He is going to be here answering all of your questions for the next hour. You have a question about your credit score, a credit report, your mortgage, refinancing, HELOCs, home equity loans, lines of credit. We are going to talk about all of that. We're going to take a break and be right back after this.
Get social with WCPT 820 and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WCPT 820.
Tom Hartman.
Autocrats generally, particularly those autocrats who have narcissistic personality disorder and are sociopaths, as is, in my opinion, Trump, typically do not tolerate high-profile people around them. They want to be the star of the show, and that's certainly been the history of Donald Trump. The only people that he will tolerate around him are people who, when he says, kiss my ass, they fall to their knees.
The Tom Hartman Radio Program, weekdays 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. on WCPT 820, where facts matter. Alexa, play WCPT.
WCPT from TuneIn.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm talking with David Hochberg. We are taking your questions. This listener who texted in, they have a question that kind of ties into something that I wanted to ask you about. So bear with me. I'm gonna set this up here. I got an email from, Goldman Sachs has been doing Marcus. They've been trying to get into the, consumer business or something. And they sent out this email saying lower interest rates may boost home renovation spending. More homeowners are choosing to stay in their current homes as a long-standing nationwide housing shortage, low turnover, a drag from hurricanes, recent run-up in mortgage rates are expected to lower existing property sales in coming months. When housing markets are tight and there aren't a lot of options for new homes, homeowners are more likely to be motivated to invest in their current homes instead of moving. Goldman Sachs Research expects mortgage rates to remain elevated for the foreseeable future, potentially falling to 6.1% toward the end of 2025. I will ask you about that part of it later, but I want to talk about the renovations because a listener also texted in that they're worried about what will happen to the price of new construction if the economy starts to go south. Like, for instance, if Donald Trump puts all these tariffs in place and people start spending a lot more to fund their daily lives and everything that, you need to build a house is going to be more expensive. What is going to, do you agree that homeowners are choosing to stay in their homes and renovate? And, are the prices for those renovations and new construction, do you see that going up or at least the potential of it?
Yeah, well, we've seen that, all the points that you mentioned, right? 70% of the homeowners, 40% of the homeowners in the United States own their home free and clear. 70% of the mortgage holders, 70% of the homeowners that have mortgages have rates under 5%. So is that causing existing homeowners to stay in their homes longer as opposed to moving? Sure. I mean, why, unless you're retiring, okay, unless you get divorced, unless somebody passes away, or unless you've just outgrown the space, you've been transferred for another job out of state, there's really no reason to sell your home, right? To leave the home that you're in and go buy another home. The flip side is that I talked to 4 listeners just on Friday after Thanksgiving. One guy was looking for to buy another home, he owned his $1.5 million home in Lake Forest, free and clear, and he wanted to buy a smaller $600,000 home, right? So there's a guy who's going to go from one property to another property, right? Because he's downsizing. He's still not going to have a mortgage, but he's moving. So that's going to free up a piece of property for somebody in Lake Forest to do. I talked to another listener. He's in his 60s. His girlfriend is in her 50s. They want to move in together. She's got a condo. He's got a condo. Hers is free and clear. He's got a mortgage. They're going to sell it, take out a mortgage on a new place. So, listen, are people staying in their homes longer because of lower interest rates? Absolutely. Okay. Are people dying, getting divorced, jobs, relocating, and retiring and want to get out of Illinois and go to someplace warmer, with the lower tax base? Absolutely. So when that happens, property will come up. Are properties going to be worth more money? Yeah. You know why they're going to be worth more money? Because we can't get our elected officials' heads out of their rectums to sit in a room and cut all the red tape it takes to build properties in the state of Illinois and throughout the country. I mean, we've been talking about this for years on this show, right? And what's happened? The same empty lots that are on the south and southeast side and southwest side of Chicago are still empty, and there's no developments going on. Okay, you want to have affordable housing and you want to sit there and talk about housing the homeless? I'll tell you what, you got to do one thing. You got to cut the red tape with these developers so these developers can put up these properties and build these properties faster, make a buck, and bring more inventory into the marketplace, right? Labor's got to sit down with the governing bodies, with the regulators, with everybody's got to get in the room, right? Everybody's got to get in the same room, put their egos on the table and say, hey, we want to build 50,000 new units in the city of Chicago. How are we going to do this? Okay? How are we going to do this? Let's all take a haircut, get 50,000 new units or 100,000 new units or 500,000 new units on the market. What's that going to do? It's going to generate jobs. going to generate tax revenue, going to generate affordable housing for people to live in. It's going to generate business for the commercial property owners that are in the area where these new properties are going into being built. It's going to take old, dilapidated properties down. It's going to turn them. You're going to turn the pig into a princess. I mean, why is this so freaking difficult that a guy who lives in Northbrook who does mortgages has got to figure this out? And you got Tony Preckwinkle and the band of Cook County Board of Commissioners down there and city elected officials who constantly want to tax instead of grow. Nobody's talking about growing. They're talking about having taxes on snow removal and having a snow removal crew to shovel people's sidewalk. I mean, what is this guy doing, right? I mean, when's the last time you heard an alderman? Right? Have you heard Tony Preckwinkle? Have you had a county board commissioner? Have you had the mayor of Chicago? Have you had anybody down, elected officials in the state and federal government say, hey, what can we do to grow businesses in Chicago so we can bring more people into Chicago to generate more tax revenues so we don't have to jam it down the throats of residential homeowners with real estate taxes? When's the last time you asked an elected official those questions when they've been on their show and they've told you an answer that is pro-growth? Never. That's the answer to my own rhetorical question. So, our property is going to be more expensive? Yes, because we are net 1 million units a year here in the United States on housing stock. Okay, and until we get that turned around, right, Kamala Harris had a plan, $25,000 for first-time home buyers and cut all the red tape. That was phenomenal. Okay, I don't know where she was going to get the $25,000. That was something to talk about later, but at least it was an idea, right? Mm-hmm. It was the same idea that President Bush and then Obama took. Okay, it started with Bush 2, and then Obama took it over with the $8,000 tax credit. Remember that in 2008? First-time home buyers, if you hadn't bought a home in the past 3 years, because that's the definition of a first-time home buyer, you're going to get an $8,000 tax credit that you're going to pay back over a 5-year period of time if you move out of that house. What did that do? That took us from 100 months of inventory, and it ate away at that inventory because you brought buyers into the market. Okay, now I could argue, and then people could argue, well, that was, the $8,000 in 2010 numbers. Does it equate to $25,000 in 2024, 25 numbers? Maybe. Who knows, right? But it costs a lot of money to buy a house. Closing costs are not cheap. It's costly. Then you got to come up with a down payment. That $25,000 that Kamala Harris came up with was a phenomenal idea. Started the conversation, right? So prices are going to continue to go up if the tariffs are in place. I talked to a bond trader today. He thinks it's just talk to get the other countries to blink and lower their prices, which if they do, it helps the U.S. consumers out. If they don't, and Trump does go through with these tariffs, yeah, it's going to cost more money. And any moron that tells you it's not and that these countries are going to absorb it, wake up and smell the freaking coffee. You're going to get jammed right down your throats because these businesses are not going to absorb the extra tariffs on their goods and on their goods. They're going to pass it right on to the consumer. Wake
David,
up.
I have one of the pundits I read also said that Trump might be using this threat of tariffs to bring certain large companies and corporations in line. Like, I think I'm going to impose tariffs. I wonder which goods I will impose those tariffs on. Oh, what? You're going to make a big donation to the RNC? Oh, well, you know what? I've been thinking that maybe your products should be exempt from the tariff. So there's always that possibility that he's using it as a way to, increase his grift. I have a question that's a really basic, probably silly question. You talked about the person that you had dealt with that owned a $1.5 million home free and clear and wanted to downsize to a $600,000 home. I'm assuming, well, let's just for hypothetical purposes say that they need the money from the first house to pay for the second house. How do you How do you do that? I mean, do you just put your first house on the market and then when it sells, move into an apartment until you can buy the second place? I mean, because if I'm selling a house for $600,000 and you say, oh, gosh, I'd really like to buy that, but my offer is contingent on my selling my home, and I'd be like, no, I'm not waiting around to see whether or not you sell your house.
Well, that's where a home equity line of credit comes into play for all your listeners out there who have a home that has a ton of equity or that they own free and clear and are thinking of moving, right? Take out a line of credit as big as you could get at the bank. Don't tell them that you're using it to buy another house, right? Tell them that you want it for future investment opportunities, and you could use it to buy a home. And don't put your house on the market, because if you put your house on the market, they're not going to get a line of credit. So the time to get the line of credit is when you think you're going to move in the next year and you want to access the equity in your home. Because, you know, if you put your house on the market, you know, listen, you could tell the bank that you want to use it to buy a new home, which is great. But if you tell them that you're going to sell your home as soon as you get this, they're not going to give you the line of credit. Right? I mean, they're not in business to give you the line of credit so they could
because the line of credit is tied to your house. Okay, let's let's use me as an example. You told me that I should have a line of credit, which I did not. So you helped me establish a line of credit. Let's say that I want to do this. I want to downsize. So for the line of credit, I have checks. Like if I write the check and it says down payment, aren't they kind of going to get an idea of what I'm doing? Or do I take, you know?
But you could use that money for whatever you want after you get it in your hands, right? Okay. So like if you're considering buying something in the summer, right? When's the best time to train for a marathon? 6-8 months before a race, not 2 weeks before the race, unless you're completely out of your mind and you're a great runner, right? So me, it's never, because I don't even like sitting in a cab for 26.2 miles. But I digress. All right. So if you know that you're going to sell your home, and you know that you have a ton of equity in your home, and you know that you don't want to be encumbered by anything, and you know properties are going quick because of the lack of inventory. We've had negative 1 million units since the collapse in 2008, 2010. So we're effectively net 14 million housing units short as a nation. Okay, you know that inventory's tight, and that homes are still selling even at 7%. The interest rates are now baked into people's heads, Joan. They're not even flinching when you tell them high sixes, low sevens. They're just it's just a fact. They know that now. Okay, so based upon that, if you're not in a defensive mode, maybe you can't buy, maybe you can't tap out all the equity of your home that you need to buy the other place for cash. But guess what? You can tap it out to 80%, use that for a down payment on a new place, and maybe run with a $100,000 mortgage, right? Maybe run with a $150,000 mortgage instead of a $600,000 mortgage or a $400,000 mortgage. Having a line of credit on a home that's paid off is your best investment. And here's another reason why. It keeps ambulance-chasing scumbag attorneys, who I know you have a bunch of them listening to the show right now. It keeps those ambulance-chasing attorneys off of your back with unwarranted lawsuits, because you have a mortgage against your house and your house is leveraged up. They're less likely to come after you because you have less equity for them to go after. Okay, and I just learned that trick after 23 years being in the business. I had no idea. So I mentioned that on another station. I had a guy, by 60, 70 years old. He's 70, wife's 60, something years old.
Hold that thought. I want to hear this story, and I want to talk about this more, but we blew through a break. Lady B, we'll take a really quick break and be back with David right now.
Stay on top of the latest news in and around Chicago with Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive. Every weekday afternoon from 2 to 5 p.m. on WCPT 820.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 a.m., WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Attention, everyone.
Don't turn that dial. Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
I'm having a conversation with David Hochberg about downsizing, and we seem to have gotten rapacious lawyers into the mix. And David, you were just about to give us an example of a couple that was going to illustrate what you've been talking about, and I rudely interrupted you. So please continue.
Rapacious. That's a big word. I got to get my thesaurus out for that one. I'm going to have to, the next break, look that one up. So here, $550, guy in his 70s married to a gal in her 60s, living a $550,000 condo free and clear in Glen Ellen. Okay, I just talked to the guy yesterday. Okay, he heard me on another radio station say same thing I just said to your listeners. To have a line, to sit on a home, condo home, the free and clear, and not have access to the liquidity in the home is just downright financial malfeasance. Okay, you can use that money for whatever you want. Number one, it protects you against any type of. It reduces your risk to lawsuits because, again, those attorneys that like to file lawsuits because you do whatever something wrong, they'll look at the property, the lien against your house, and see that you're leveraged up to 80% because the home equity line of credit to 80%, even though you don't draw it, you can. It's less equity for them to go after you. It's just a fact. Ask any attorney that. The other thing is you should have access to your money for a God forbid moment. I'm Jewish. I was raised by a Jewish mother, and she said that at least 15 times a day. God forbid anything goes wrong, you need to have a couple of shekels in your pocket to get yourself out of the mix, right? I can't tell you how many times listeners have come to me when everything was hunky-dory and they own their home free and clear and everything's great, then somebody gets hurt, somebody loses a job, somebody dies, and then all of a sudden you got to dip into your reserves for a quick 10, 15, 100, 150 grants. Somebody needs something, a family member needs something, and you don't have it because you lost your job or you got cut back on your hours or you blew your credit up for some unknown reason. Right? And then now you can't get to it. So the best time to get a line of credit is when you don't need a line of credit, so you have access to the funds rapidly and they're readily available when you never thought you needed it. And for that holy crap moment and that God forbid moment when you do need it, all you have to do is rip a check off your line of credit to access the funds. It's that simple. And for you, if you own a home and you don't have a line of credit, it is financial malfeasance of what you're doing to yourself and your family, not having a line of credit there to protect you. It's that simple. And I make no money off of a line of credit. I'm just telling our listeners what they should do. Right? It's kind of like it's kind of like telling somebody, hey, you should think about fastening your seatbelt because number one, it's the law, and number two, you won't go through the windshield if you have God forbid, you have an accident. Right? So, okay, yeah, you see, your dog agrees with me there as well. So think of a HELOC as your seatbelt, so you don't go through the windshield when you have that front end collision that you never thought you were going to have and you never planned for it. I'm going to start using that. I just came up with that. That was great.
Okay, that's very, very good. Clearly, my dog approves. Another question here. A listener bought a rural property of about 20 acres that was a business. It was a pet care business with a kennel. Yeah. They want to convert it to a home property. They said that the only business remnants left are a fancy pole barn with a pond, and that's about it. But the rate they're being quoted is over 8%. Is it, if you want to do something like this, if you decide you want to be a farmer in retirement or just have lots and lots of grass to mow, buy a business and try to make it into a home, you pay higher rates?
Well, if it's a commercial property or an agricultural piece of property, again, it depends on how it's zoned, right? So if it's zoned ag, and I don't mean to go too deep into the woods here, but it all depends on how the property is zoned and what the appraiser that comes out there to appraise the property does is the best use of the property, right? So if this is specifically, and I'll give you an attorney answer. It depends, right? But specifically, if this listener, right, has a piece of property and bought it as it was once a kennel, right, to raise dogs or to do whatever, train dogs, and it's now going to be a residential property, there is no reason if it checks all the boxes, and there's a lot of boxes, and I'll be more than happy to give a call to the listener and do a free consultation to this listener, as I offered to the other listener that had the horrible credit, that was credit challenge and wanted to do work on their home. I'll talk with this listener to dive deeper off air, but there is an opportunity to get regular pricing, and if not, I have relations with banks that will do that type of property. Might be a little elevated in the rate, but it can get done. So I'd be more than happy to give that listener a free consultation as well.
Okie dokie. Let's see. Yeah, we've got time. This listener wants to know how long you think young families are going to wait to buy a home. I think what they're talking about is how frustrated are they going to be? Maybe if you're 22, you don't expect to buy a home. But if you're 32 and you're married and you have a kid, you're probably thinking about buying a home. What is that window how long do young people appear to be willing to wait for that first home right now?
Well, again, I'll give you the attorney answer. It depends, because I talked with a fraternity brother of mine's daughter out in Colorado. She's 26, buying her first home. Very, very excited, making $85,000 a year. She wants to buy a 2-3 bedroom home out in Colorado. It's going to be a stretch for her if she does it on her own, but she plans on getting a roommate, right, and charge the roommate $1,000 to $1,500. So I ran her through all the numbers. I got to call Dave after we hang up, to give him an update as to what happened with his daughter yesterday. But it all depends, right? I mean, I've got 24, 28-year-olds making $85,000 to $120,000 a year that aren't loaded down with debt, that have got great credit, that have saved a ton of money and are looking to get in. She has this gal out, my fraternity brother's daughter. She's got $50,000-$60,000 saved in the market, right? So she's been investing in the stock market since she graduated college. But as I recommended to her and to everybody listening, if she cashes that out, I'm not a CPA, check with your financial advisor and your tax preparer, but if she cashes out any of that money, she's going to have to pay taxes on that money, and it's been a good run in the stock market, so why cash it out now, right? So when you could, first-time home buyer like this young lady, $85,000 a year, $400,000 home, she could get in with a 3% down payment, $12,000. Right, closing costs will be anywhere from $4,000 to $6,000, $8,000, depending upon where you're at and what town you're in and state you're in. If you live in Chicago, it's more expensive because of the transfer tax that they hit first-time home buyers with. But it all depends, right? But again, it goes back to what we talked about during the second segment of the show. When are all of the stakeholders going to get into a room and put their egos on the shelf, check it when they get in the room, and say, how are we going to and what are we going to do to build 50 to 100 to 150 to 300,000 units? What are we going to do? What government's got to get involved? Labor's got to get involved. The trades have to get involved. What are we going to do? Because guess what? The people that work in government, the people that work in the trades, the people that drive the trucks, the people that operate the machinery that build these houses want to own a house as well. And they want their kids to own a house as well. And guess what? That dream is shrinking every single day because everything is so expensive, because we're not bringing on more inventory to keep the prices in check. Okay? We're not bringing on any more inventory. You want to keep prices in check? Bring on more inventory. So please, when you get an elected official on, please text me because I want to hear it. Okay? Would you please ask them specifically, what are you doing to encourage growth in business in Chicago? What are you doing to encourage commercial properties to be built and to be occupied and to attract commercial businesses into the city of Chicago to expand the tax base? Because when you do that, Joan, right, you will bring more businesses in. You will bring more people in to buy these houses. And that's what we have to do. What are you doing to encourage building in your ward?
Well,
what are you doing to encourage?
What do you think of Governor Pritzker's plan, the South Shore Steelworks? I've seen the drawings. He wants to make that a quantum computing area, and so far it seems to be sailing along pretty well. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about? A big taking an unused piece of land and repurposing it and doing it in a way that brings jobs in?
Yes, that's been shut down since April of 1992. Okay, so I would like them to do that. I would like them to not take 30 freaking years to do that. Okay, I used to go to Southworks. I was in the scrap iron and metal industry. One of the first steel mills I ever went into was U.S. Steel Southworks. Okay, I worked at a scrapyard at 200 East 87th Street. That's now the Home Depot. They're like, kid, get in the truck and go see a steel mill. It was the most fascinating thing I've ever seen. It was 1988, in the drought of 1988. I went to a steel mill. That was the first steel mill I ever went into, right? That steel mill shut down in April of 1992, Joan. We have had nothing, zero, zilch. That has been an absolute abomination on the southeast side of Chicago. Those poor people that live within walking distance of that property that has been vacant since 1992. Joan, 30 years. It shouldn't take 30. That's my point. It shouldn't take 30 years for elected officials and government leaders to do something with a ginormous piece of property on the city of Chicago's southeast side and all the other pieces of property on the southeast and southwest side that have been sitting vacant for 30-plus years. And all the friends of the park that are upset and crying in their soup about the environmental concerns. You had a freaking steel mill running there for almost 100 years. Okay? It's shut down. Now you're going to put up this quantum, whatever the heck they're going to do there. You're going to bring jobs. You're going to redevelop the area. So if the friends of the park want to, like poo-poo this and block it, let them pay for all the commercial real estate taxes that would have been generated from this unbelievable opportunity to develop an empty piece of Chicago that have sat empty for over 30 years, and we've lost hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, in tax revenue that could have been generated if you would have redeveloped that property. Okay, that's the exact point I'm trying to make. The lost opportunity that these aldermen, that these elected officials at the county and the state and in Congress, you're not bringing back and delivering for Illinois. That's why we continue to be in the top one or two of the Beacon's backhaul list, recipients, which means people are moving out, Joan. They're not coming back. Okay? So wake up. I'm happy that Governor Pritzker did it, but it shouldn't have taken 30 freaking years to do. And there's other huge pieces of property on the southeast side of Chicago off the Bishop Ford that can use the same TLC that Southworks is finally getting. It's a joke. It's an absolute travesty. And again, I blame the elected officials, the leaders, going back to Mayor Byrne, going back to Rahm Emanuel, Mayor Daley, Lightfoot, all those, they did nothing. Okay, they've left the southeast side of Chicago to rot. It's rotting, Joan, and it doesn't have to rot. Okay, there's unbelievable opportunities to generate jobs, to generate opportunities, to give people within those communities an opportunity to work at these new job sites and to get jobs within these companies, and then to open a business to support these businesses that are opening on these brownfields. That's the whole point I've been saying for 2.5 years on your show. Ever since you first invited me on, I've been pounding these people about the brownfields on the south and southeast and southwest side of Chicago. Okay? And finally, I applaud Pritzker for doing that. Let's get it done. And the friends of the park, get the hell out of the way. Okay? Let this happen. Shut your mouths. It's ridiculous. Thank you, Joan, for firing me up. I just turned my heat off.
I sometimes don't like to have David Hochberg on because he has no passion. The man just doesn't ever seem to really care about anything. I'll see. We'll take a break. I'll see if I can get him to be more passionate when we come right back after this.
Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by David Hochberg. We are asking him your questions. Okay, this one, I think even I know the answer, but I've been surprised before, so I'll just ask you. My home has crappy pipes coming from below the basement. I should get new pipes, as they sometimes get some water buildup in the basement. This is sporadic. If I sold my home and didn't divulge this info, can I be sued after the sale by the new homeowner?
Absolutely. There's disclosures that you have to fill out, that every seller has to sign and complete a questionnaire if you know of any defects in your home. And obviously, if that listener is texting into your show about a defect in their home, that's something that you should
David,
probably
I know
fix.
that if you live in a community that gets a lot of rain, especially when you get a really big rain really fast, a lot of people get water in their basement. I wonder why this person thinks that has to do with crappy pipes.
I don't know. That's something. I've got a great plumber at Center Guard that I can refer them to, and I've got a great relationship with the folks at Permaseal that could come out. There was a huge challenge that the residents in off of Pulaski and Cicero had. I know they run side by side. But the residents at Cicero, we had a huge flood, like I think it was last year or the year before, and the water was backing up and was going into residents' homes. Well, there's something called a trap, and there's something that can be done where they can put something in front of your house that has a trap that doesn't allow the water to go into your house. It goes someplace else. Listen, I'm not a water expert here, but to answer the listeners' questions, is this. You have to fill out a disclosure form. It's got a bunch of yes or no questions. Do you does your home leak? Yes. And if you say no, and then after the first rain it leaks, guess what? The seller's coming after you. That's not a good place to be. So don't be a jerk and lie on the disclosures, because it's just going to come back and bite you in the rear end eventually.
Okie dokie. Somebody wanted to comment on your actually, we've gotten a couple of people who've written in to comment on the whole Southworks thing. And one person talked about how their dad was an electrician there and he got cancer, and was the land contaminated? Yes, the land was found to be contaminated. And they have done what they call remediation. And that takes a lot of different forms. Sometimes they scoop up the top layers of topsoil. But, yes, that is a problem that they knew that they had. And according to what I've been reading, I have not investigated exactly what has been done where, but they believe that they have nullified that problem. Somebody else wrote in this. It's a beautiful park right now, and it's right along the lakefront. The concern of residents that live there is that quantum computing is going to pollute Lake Michigan, because they're also going to be doing drug research and computer chip building. I believe my hope is that the Governor Pritzker has set in place EPA standards so this company doesn't pollute the water, and it will then revitalize the South Side. I have a piece of property over there, and I'm happy to see him. I don't want to see it pollute the waters, and that may be an obstacle, but hopefully they've got that taken care of. I also, like you made reference to, I read that Friends of the Parks was concerned about this development, and I don't know if the water pollution issue was part of that, because I didn't read the details, but that's a couple of comments we've gotten on that. Oh, wait a minute. The crappy pipe. I'm hearing again from crappy pipe. Hang on. A plumber told me my pipes have shrunken from rust, and they saw this on cameras. So it would need jackhammering, which would be quite an expense. Shrunken from rust. Okay.
Well, I guess it ate away at the pipe. So here's the challenge. If a buyer goes into that texter's home and does a pipe inspection, right, a sewer inspection, which everybody should do, which probably less than 10% of the home buyers do, and they see that the pipes are being rusted out, you're going to have a challenge. And then you're going to have to disclose it, and your realtor is going to make you disclose it, or you're going to have to give a tax. You're going to have to give a closing cost credit to the seller. The seller's got to give a closing cost credit to the buyer to remediate the challenge after the closing. And here, I just want to bring in one point to everybody that's concerned about dirty water, and they should be, and that is a valid concern. I will tell you this. U.S. Steel Gary Works, okay, gigantic steel mill in Gary. They have monitoring, and this was back when I was in the scrap industry. I was in it from 88 to 2000. I was in and out of steel mills and foundries the entire time I was, during that 12-year period of time. Probably thousands of steel mills and foundries in that 12-year period of time, okay? The same one multiple times. There's not thousands anymore. But I can tell you this. Back when I was in the scrap industry, I'm sure it holds true today, that they specifically told you when you took a tour that whatever water that U.S. Steel Gary Works takes out of Lake Michigan, and they take out millions of gallons of water to cool that steel down and to keep their machines running, they have to put it back cleaner than what they took it out. And there are monitors on the discharge culverts back into the lake, and the EPA is all over that. So your listeners' concerns are valid. If it has any type of hazardous waste there, U.S. Steel should be responsible for whatever remediation needs to be done to make that property whole and get that property clean. That's on U.S. Steel's back, okay? And if the state doesn't go after them, then I'm sure Kwame Raoul will go after them for that if they haven't already, if past administrations haven't already done it. And whatever water they take out, every steel mill that's on a body of water, that is the rule. Whatever water you take out to put into your plant, there is going to be water that's put back. You have to treat that water and put it back cleaner than what you took it out. So I hope that calms your listeners down a little bit, because I don't know if they might not have known that topic and that little piece of information.
One last question. The rule of thumb always used to be that if you rehab a bathroom or you rehab a kitchen, you can get that value back out when you sell your property. But like if you rehab or, a hallway, that's probably not going to be something that increases your home's value. Still true?
I would defer that to a realtor, right? Because I know that I know that bathrooms, according to the realtors that I've been speaking with, bathrooms, you get the biggest bang for your buck, and then it goes from there.
Oh, really? So even more than a kitchen?
It comes down to this, right? It comes down to this. Where I get this question all the time, right? If you've got a kitchen circa 1965 kitchen, you still got the avocado green, appliances. Nothing wrong with them. I had that in the apartments that I grew up with, right? And the kitchen's falling apart, and you wanna put money into your kitchen because you're tired of having the door fall off or the microwave doesn't work. Then put the money into your house. Right? If you want to know where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck, consult a real estate professional, a realtor in the area that you live. If you need one, I will refer you to one to ask these questions. To ask this on a radio show is probably not the best thing because I'm not a realtor, and it's best to ask a realtor that knows the sticks and bricks in your area that you live and that you're thinking of buying or you're thinking of selling or that you currently own and that you might be considering selling in the future, so you don't put any extra work into a house that you don't necessarily have to sell it.
Okay. All right. You know some realtors that you rely on. What if you live in a community that David Hochberg isn't familiar with, how do you as a human being figure out who's a good realtor?
Oh, just like this, a young lady, my buddy's daughter, she sent me 5 to 6 towns in Colorado that she's interested in buying. I'm going to call Sarah Leonard, who's my top realtor I work with in the area. I'm going to say, hey, Sarah, I've got a young lady, daughter of a fraternity brother of mine, looking to buy in these 5 towns in Colorado. She's got relationships with a bunch of realtors located throughout the United States, and she'll connect them up with the realtor, and away we go. I'm going to help this young lady get a mortgage, and Sarah is going to connect her with a realtor in the area that she trusts, that I would then trust, that this young lady could trust, and they'll go out and start hunting for homes.
Huh. Okay. All right. That makes sense.
Wasn't this fun?
I love it when we get so many questions from listeners. The last few times we've been on, listeners, it just seems like the questions have been pouring out of people. You know, David and I actually do talk about, like, you know, okay, let's touch on these topics and these topics. But first and foremost, we always put your questions and your concerns on the air. And for the last few times he's been on, we've had so many questions that we've never gotten to the, oh, well, we could talk about this and we could talk about that. So a lot of interest out there, David, a lot of interest out there.
Yeah, I think you should have me on every other week. I think your listeners are demanding the information, which I'm more than happy to supply.
All right.
Same pay
okay.
scale.
Let's say like okay. So like though you're talking like maybe the week of Monday, December 16th. Okay. All right. You know.
Yeah, I'm available. I'm free. Yeah.
Oh, you know, I'm going to take some time off over the holidays. Maybe you can come on in and host.
I could do that. I did that at another station last Friday. I'm more than capable. So bring it on. Let me know where I have to be and where you want me. I'll invite Tony Preckwinkle will be my first guest. Then Mayor Johnson will be my second guest, and then all the elected officials. I'll line them all up. They'll have no shows throughout the entire shows.
David, thank you so much. I seriously am going to talk to Andy. And see if we can put you on the fill-in roster, because I think that would be fun for a lot of people. So take care, my friend. It's been a quick hour, as always.
Thanks for the opportunity to talk with and help your listeners out. It's always a pleasure. You have a great day. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. David Hochberg. 56david.com on your computer, okay? 56david.com. We're going to take a break for news. We're going to talk about what's going on in Syria and Iran right after this.
Remember when you get to work to hop over to WCPT820.com or the TuneIn Radio app and stream The Stephanie Miller Show. Weekdays 8 to 11 a.m. on Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter. Because facts matter. You're listening to WCPT 820.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
Take her away, Ian.
Yeah, take it away, Ernie. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
Joan Esposito.
Whoa, that's an explosive sentence.
On WCPT 820.
I am pleased to welcome back to our program Benim Talablu. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of brain fog. I've just been in bed for like the last 10 days with COVID. So please, if my questions are a little confusing today, Benim, please just bear with me and try to make sense of what I'm saying. I'm doing the best I can with what I've got, which seems to be very little. So...
Oh, goodness. Not to worry. Great to be back with you, Joan, and wishing you a speedy recovery.
Thank you. Thank you. At least I can speak today. Yesterday, halfway through the show, my voice just stopped temporarily, which was a real treat for my radio listeners. Anyway, I brought you back. Originally, when we reached out, I wanted to talk more about Iran, but that was before there started to be this new reporting about rebels in the civil war in Syria making some serious advances. Please talk to us about that situation.
Yeah, for about 4+ years now, media and world and political attention had turned away, not just from Syria proper, or only it would kind of pop up when there was an Israeli raid or something by an Iran-backed militia moving there. We really lost sight of the fact that there had been for over a decade a contest between the state and the street, and then that contest had yielded violence, and that violence was taken advantage of by foreign and domestic actors who were armed insurgents, Islamists, jihadists. You had all sorts of folks running in there, Al-Qaeda in there, ISIS in there. But in 2020, there was a brokered, I don't want to say ceasefire, but sort of stalemate via Turkey and less so Russia in the northwest in this historic and important city called Aleppo, that in 2016, after many years of a siege, Iran-backed forces as well as Russia helped the Assad regime liberate. And Turkey, which has backed its own kind of armed Islamist faction in much of this multi-sided, kaleidoscopic Rubik's Cube of a Syrian civil war, many of which have ties to very dangerous Islamist terrorist organizations, have had their own separate sets of interests here. And for America and the West, which is looking at what its interests and what its values are here, Turkey's been a confounding factor because it's a NATO country. It's the second biggest army in NATO, but it's worked primarily, but not exclusively, but primarily against the Kurds who occupy part of the east and the north of Syria, and that's where the big border is with Turkey. And much of Turkey's formal and indirect military operations have been designed to break the Kurds, who have been largely America's partner in the fight against ISIS. And the reason America picked the Kurds as its partner many years ago in the fight against ISIS is because the Kurds were willing to target ISIS alone, whereas many of the Arab armed assailants, some of which later on became terrorist organizations or later on linked up with terrorist organizations, basically wanted to first go after Assad, the dictator of Syria who lives in Damascus. And so, long story short, for the past 4 years, there's been this illusion of peace because of this Turkish and Russian brokered stalemate in the northwest. And then there were reports that HTS, this group, which is a successor of a previously al-Qaeda-linked organization, had really said that there was going to be an offensive earlier this year. They were thwarted. They decided against it. They were detected. There's multiple reasons why this offensive that happened late last Friday, Saturday, didn't happen earlier, but nonetheless, it happened late last Friday, Saturday, and really you began to see the Assad regime's armed forces, the Syrian army, melt away, first from two historic cities, Aleppo then, and much more recently today, large parts of Homs. And so these Turkey-backed forces, coupled with some other nefarious terrorist organizations, have basically moved further and have cleared a path to advance against Assad in Damascus. And in lieu of this, Russians are doubling their efforts to save him, but also that country that you mentioned at the lead of this show, the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is the chief arsonist of many of these fires in the region. And now for the Israelis, the Americans, some of the Arab states in the region, the question is, now what? You know, the UAE, for example, is quite keen to foster some sort of a diplomatic maneuver to split Iran from Assad and the Russians. The Israelis are looking kind of cautiously, almost channeling a line ascribed to, at one time, Henry Kissinger and at one time Menachem Begin, basically looking at the two sides and saying what those individuals were purported to have said during the 1980-1988 Iran-Iraq war, which is a shame that both can't lose.
You mentioned a few minutes ago that the Assad forces melted away when the other forces came to Aleppo and the other city. Does that mean that their leaders ordered them to pull back? Does that mean that there is support for this and this was a choice they made to walk away? I'm curious about why that would happen. I mean, I can't imagine if there were any kind of civil war in the United States that the military would simply melt away from Indianapolis, you know, if the forces that were trying to, disrupt the country took Indianapolis. I'm curious about that.
Well, I mean, many have made several analogies, but God forbid we transpose a lot of the Middle East fighting onto American politics. So I think, like you, I do worry from all sides about, God forbid, later on the prospect of political violence. And I think that's something as citizens we need to be vigilant against. But nonetheless, as it relates to Assad's forces, I think it's just a classic command and control issue. One might say, wouldn't the fear of a group like HTS, Harakat Tahrir al-Sham, coming at you inspire you to fight against them even further? But for places where the troop morale is low, where this was seemingly unexpected, where training is poor, and in general troop discipline is low, faced with a surprise offensive or really an operation that has both breadth and depth, these kind of tactics, melting away, retreating in a rather disorganized fashion, putting up limited bouts of resistance, are not uncommon. And so I think the Assad regime is ceding territory. They are regrouping. They are desperate for their international partners like the Iranians and the Russians to muster support. There's already allegations that the Russians would be using some of their proxy forces in Syria, potentially some of the Africa Corps. We know Wagner, for example, the other group, had already been in Syria in the past. We know that via the Iranians, via social media, the Afghan brigade that the Iranians created to help bail out Assad in the past, the Fatimiyun were present and are being called up again. We know that from public reporting, the Iran-backed militias in Iraq, which occupy a critical border between Iraq and Syria, have crossed that border as part of the larger fight to save the Assad regime. And so the million-dollar question will be, given Israel's military successes against Hezbollah, and given the fact that Hezbollah played such a crucial role as part of the connective tissue in this axis of resistance to save Assad in the past when they intervened militarily in that Syrian civil war starting in 2013, will Lebanese Hezbollah be able to, after the beating is taken from the Israelis, be able to once again cross over and once again work on behalf of Iran to bail out the Assad regime in Damascus?
What form would this aid, the aid that Assad wants from Iran and from Russia, other than the Wagner Group? Because, to fight the war in Ukraine, it seems like Putin has recruited North Korea to help there with the thousands of troops that were sent over and are being used in Ukraine. And I know Russia, they have a very large population, but they've also taken an extraordinarily large number of casualties in Ukraine. So what kind of, how much money is Putin willing to spend on Syria? What can the help really be? And I guess I'm asking the same of Iran as well.
Well, I think this is just a worthwhile reminder that for both of those countries, which have taken quite a beating, the Russians now, again, are on the offensive in Ukraine, given that war has shifted into a war of attrition, and with the military rates of production and kind of lacking Western resolve, things are looking like they'll favor the Russians, at least in the short term, in Ukraine. Plus, of course, you have the added winter factor there. And the Iranians have seen in the post-October 7 Middle East, but more importantly, in the past, I would say, since late July, early August, much of their axis of resistance take a significant beating. They're not destroyed, but they face some significant setbacks in Gaza, where Hamas is, in Lebanon, where Hezbollah is, in Syria, where the Assad regime is, and some of the Iran-backed militias, and certainly the Houthis who are in Yemen. All have been really pushed back on militarily and rapidly by the Israelis, overtly and covertly. And given that both Russia and Iran are financially strapped, financially cash-strapped to begin with, this does put them in a bind. But that nonetheless gets us away from the conversation about capabilities and that which they would provide Assad with, which is almost exclusively military aid, equipment, men, trainers, advisors, fighters, proxy fighters, foreign fighters. You mentioned the North Koreans in Ukraine on behalf of Russia, for example. I remember there were videos from earlier in the Ukraine war about Russia lying to get Nepali workers onto the battlefield in Ukraine. There are reports just recently of the Russians looking to use a proxy of Iran, the Houthis in Yemen, to get them to fight on allegedly quote-unquote worker programs via Russia into Ukraine. So creativity, unfortunately, does favor these kinds of states, and we have seen them be able to use foreign fighters in different theaters before. But the kind of aid that they would give would be lethal and would be military. And the reason they would surge, despite one thinking both Russia is divided and distracted and Iran is distracted, is because for both of their foreign and security policies, particularly the ideology of both authoritarians, Putin in Moscow and Khamenei in Iran, keeping Syria in their orbit and keeping the Assad regime afloat is critical. For the Russians, that's their port into the Mediterranean. That's long been their arms sales partner. The Russians are, fond of saying they have good relations with all sides. It's the Assad regime that gives them a bridge to do that. And the Iranians know that the Assad regime and Syrian territory writ large is their bridge into Lebanon, where their most important proxy is Hezbollah, and it's their bridge into the Eastern Mediterranean and part of this critical constellation of this belt of instability that Iran-backed forces flow men, money, and munitions against throughout the entire northern tier of the Middle East. So geopolitically, strategically, ideationally, Syria matters very much for Iran and Russia, and we'll see them act on how much it matters, despite how many setbacks both regimes have faced.
I'm speaking with the senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, Behnam Ben Taleblu. We are going to take a real quick break and be back with more after this.
Podcasts of Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and Amazon. Just search for Joan Esposito.
Hey Google, play WCPT.
Streaming Chicago's progressive talk from TuneIn.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm speaking with Behnam Ben Taleblu, senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. We started this conversation talking about Syria. You mentioned a couple of minutes ago Saudi Arabia either playing a role or wanting to play a role. I know that right before the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel, that Saudi Arabia was very close to reaching some kind of an agreement with Israel. What is it that Saudi Arabia wants to happen in this region, and what, if anything, can they do about it?
Forgive me, I meant the United Arab Emirates, the UAE there.
Oh.
But the Saudis are obviously the biggest player in the GCC, in this entity called the Gulf Cooperation Council. And with the ascension of MBS, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, you've seen a lot of shifts in Saudi Arabia's regional policy, domestic policy. The fact that right before COVID, for example, let me just use this as an example, Saudi Arabia invited Persian singers to a large party to perform at, to a large venue to perform at a historic Nabatean archaeological site called Al-Ula in the north of that country in the desert. So there is a lot of cultural game-changing things going on the ground in Saudi Arabia that could have a positive ripple effect for much of the war-torn Middle East. The challenge Saudi Arabia will face is not just, navigating the politics of the Arab street versus the Arab state, particularly with the Palestine issue in the post-October 7 Middle East. The challenge is that it's much harder to build as the Saudis are doing, than to destroy, which is what much of this Iran-backed axis is doing, and really what will be coming the more Israel continues to push back militarily against a lot of Tehran's terror proxies. That's not a call to not push back, but it's a realization that war will be extended because the Israelis have now found that while there may not be a military solution, there's at least a military option in some of these theaters. And while Saudi Arabia and Israel are actually more so on the same page than ever before, and that should allow both the outgoing Biden administration and the incoming Trump administration to find ways to, again, foster normalization so that the pro-American partners in the region can talk to one another more, so that there's a more stable order. This crisis that we see in the northern tier of the Middle East, this arc of instability, will put limits on that. And it will make risk-averse states like Saudi Arabia constantly have to hedge more. And because it has to protect that which it's been trying to build, it will be, again, more and more risk-averse, which unfortunately will buy space and time for this axis that seeks to destroy, to do that which they're doing. The UAE is playing this hedging game. It's unclear what the Saudi view is of the current situation between Assad and the rebels. But towards the patron of Assad, towards the Iranians, the Saudis used to be, at the front of the helm of having a hawkish position against the Islamic Republic. You might equate that to the classic, 1990s, 2000s Republican position on countering Iran or rolling back Iran in the region, something a la George W. Bush. But a lot has changed with the Yemen war, with the Khashoggi crisis, with the changing American energy dynamics in the region, with the post-Iraq war Middle East. And MBS has really come into his own in this space at a time when America seems to be retreating. And because, again, that's what she's trying to build is fundamentally a more pro-status quo and pro-stability-based order. that means he's not going to be taking a lot of the risks that a lot of the other actors, state and non-state, are taking in this region. And that precisely explains why, at the surface, there may be more contradictions in Saudi policy than meets the eye. The chief example being that despite the unchanged position, deeper in the Saudi court and in the Saudi psyche towards the Islamic Republic of Iran, at the government level, for example, they're continuing their normalization. You now have flights between a major Shia city in Saudi Arabia and a major Shia city in Iran, between Dammam and Mashhad, or Dhahran and Mashhad. And this is, again, important and historic. But this stuff is brought to you by Saudi efforts to not do this out of a genuine change in ideology towards Iran, but trying to hedge, to buy off and accommodate the regime's appetite for aggression so that the Saudis are not at the top of the target list.
You said MBS is coming into his own and is positioned to basically be a huge power in the region. And yet, if I understood you correctly, you also said that MBS is very risk-averse, so that maybe actions that others would take, he would not. Would you talk about that a little bit more?
Well, perhaps as an individual, I would say he's made a lot of bold decisions. The changes in Saudi society, again, that one concert alone. Much more recently, folks have been pointing to the J-Lo concert, if I'm not mistaken there. There's a lot of things that are happening now in Saudi Arabia that, 10, 15 years ago, one could not have even fathomed happening in other corners of the Middle East. Yet they are happening in Saudi Arabia now, and that is a testament to the bold leadership domestically. The challenge is, as this is filtered through what Saudi Arabia has to do abroad and through the rest of the system in that country, that's where you see that boldness and that desire to achieve that which they say they would like, which is a lot of the energy, environmental, financial, and even political changes that they have associated with something like Vision 2030 to fundamentally transform Saudi Arabia. They would need stability. They would need peace all around them. And again, that explains why they have pulled punches in other areas that one might expect them to have traditionally doubled down. For example, Saudi Arabia has a gigantic Red Sea coast, yet Saudi Arabia is not part of any of the maritime coalitions, be it the American and UK-led one, or the other EU-led one, to defend against Houthi attacks on international shipping. And while, I would recommend that the Saudis do that they do actually support these multinational maritime coalitions there, the same with Egypt. These two countries have gigantic Red Sea borders. The Saudis would immediately come back and probably say, well, we are one of the few countries who the Houthis in Yemen have not fired at. So, unfortunately, their strategy of accommodation and hedging, which is, in my view, sitting in Washington, thinking about the U.S. national interest, is not the best when you're trying to develop a counter-Iran coalition in the region. But if you're Saudi Arabia and you're trying to get to Vision 2030 and have stability and prosperity be the fundamental driver of the risks that you are willing to take, then that decision makes imminent sense.
I see what you're saying there. We need to take a break, but when we come back, I want to have a discussion with you about what we can expect from American policy under the new Trump regime. I mean, Trump has obviously made it very clear that anything Benjamin Netanyahu wants to do, he is absolutely okay with. And I'm curious as to whether or not that means that Benjamin Netanyahu will be basically creating American policy throughout this entire region, or whether there will actually be American positions on some of these conflicts that might differ from that we see in Israel. We are going to take a real quick break, and then Ben Talablu, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and I will be right back after this.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
This is Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
And I am joined by Ben Talablu, the senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. We have been talking about the Middle East, Syria, Iran, and with Donald Trump becoming our next president on January 20th, it seems to me, Benham, he's going to have a bit of a problem on his hands because he's a big supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu. He's a big supporter of Vladimir Putin. And in this region, those interests don't seem to align. What do you think is going to be happening with American policy in the Middle East?
Well, I would respectfully recast some of the stuff vis-a-vis Russia, and particularly if we're going to compare it to the Trump Term 1 policy, which at least gave, I think, the Ukrainians a fighting chance, because no matter the botched politics of that phone call, I think, with Zelensky back in the day, we all do remember the transfer, finally, of some of these critical anti-tank weapons like the Javelin that gave Ukrainian forces defending their territory a fighting chance in 2022. But there too, I would look to that other contradiction that will be inherent in his policy, and it's not about Russia or China or his relationship with personal leaders versus the national policy. The contradiction that I worry about is a contradiction that we've seen in every U.S. president's approach towards the Middle East since the end of the second Bush administration, which is no U.S. president will get elected to national politics promising to do more in the Middle East. And yet we've had President Obama, President Trump, President Biden, and then now again President Trump run on platforms of doing less. But each time the policies rooted in the fast-changing realities of the Middle East have required the U.S. to do more. And so if the Trump administration is intent on implementing exactly which that they said they would do in Term 2 against Iran, as well as give the Israelis a freer hand, which is a freer hand against the Iran-backed threat network in the region and maximum economic pressure against the regime in Tehran, well, that will actually require the U.S. to have to do more to defend against the counterpunch that was, with respect, not well defended against in Trump Term 1. I mean, much of the hedging that we talked about, be it from the UAE or the Saudis, is because when the rubber finally hit the road and they moved into that hawkish position against the Iranians, in 2019, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries saw the U.S. not respond to the downing of its own drone. In 2019, those countries saw the U.S. not come to Saudi Arabia's aid when the Iranians historically launched cruise missiles and suicide drones against the perhaps most critical oil installation on this planet. And then again in 2020, after the U.S. killed Iran's chief terrorist in Iraq, Qasem Soleimani, the U.S. absorbed what it was at that point in time the largest single-day ballistic missile strike in history and the largest ballistic missile strike on U.S. position since the end of World War II. And so all of this has created an appetite for risk tolerance, not risk aversion, vis-a-vis the Iranians and the Americans. And while the stated goal of the Trump policy will be to get a deal, it remains questionable right now how that will actually happen. And that, I wouldn't say, is necessarily his fault. I mean, right now, again, you have the military option being credibly wielded by the Israelis. You have the Iranian nuclear program, which, due to advances in the past 2 years, they've made knowledge-based gains that even if you have a war or if you have a deal or if you have something else, you can't take this knowledge out of the heads of this regime when it comes to some of these nuclear steps that they've mastered, like enrichment at 60% purity, phasing in more advanced centrifuges, those machines which spin and purify uranium at faster rates with a smaller footprint, making this program easier to hide, harder to bomb, harder to detect, that kind of thing. And then ultimately their production in the past of uranium metal, something they have no immediate civilian need for, and the production of it with 20% enriched uranium, which is a stand-in for highly enriched uranium, meaning the Iranians are essentially trying to learn how to fashion, to build the core for a weapon in plain sight. So all of these things will be forcing functions that will run against the philosophy of Trump, who wants to do less in the region. And all of these things will require the U.S. to be serious and to do more. And in general, even if these things did not exist, he would have to go back to those debates that existed in 2018 and 2019 and 2020 on U.S. policy towards the rest of the region. You know, we had the Abraham Accords stem off some annexation in the West Bank. Well, how do we get Abraham Accords 2.0? And how do you do that in a post-October 7 Middle East? This is a question. The same question will exist for what will the future of U.S. troops in Syria be? I mean, lest we forget, there were bureaucratic games being played galore about how to hide this issue from former President Trump. There were a whole host of times the U.S. president wanted all of these troops out to begin with, whereas I think, in my view, respectfully, that limited number is actually an economy of force mission. I do think that number would have to be scaled up given how serious some of this stuff is going, the serious the counter-Iran threat is in the region, but we also have to now more cleverly weigh that against changing politics in Iraq, as well as, of course, what the future of the Assad regime versus the fight against these Islamist rebels and militants will require us to have to do in Syria. So it is a large mess, and I see no clear overarching strategy. Perhaps it will be articulated later. I would hope it would be articulated later, but thus far there is no prism with which to view the region through.
You mentioned Iran's efforts to get a nuclear program underway. If Iran does become a nuclear power, how does that change the region?
You know, this is something that I'll punt to our European friends who have said this throughout the Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden administrations, which is, and they've been manning the diplomatic posts here. They've been saying, and they've had issues with all of those administrations on Iran policy. But the one reason that has allowed them to stay at the table with us, despite all of our changing politics and political demands during each of those very different administrations, is because there was a baseline consensus that the Islamic Republic of Iran should not be able to have the world's most dangerous weapons, that the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism should not be able to have the ultimate deterrent. And the Europeans really have rightly rung the alarm bell on the current administration being asleep at the wheel, even not being able to wield diplomatic pressure. And in the face of the Israelis really taking out much more recently a lot of the conventional deterrent apparatus, the drones, the missiles, the terrorist proxies of the Islamic Republic, well, the nuclear imperative, or the imperative to go nuclear, shall we say, for the Islamic Republic is growing. There was periods of time when, many years would pass, 5-6 years would pass, and then Iranian officials once within those 5 or 6 years would, rattle the nuclear saber. That was just rattled, 11 to 14 times in the past month and a half. So the Iranians are taking a page from Putin's playbook, who's rattling his nuclear saber in Ukraine and seeing the dividends, and they may go all the way to try to force President Trump's hand, or they may try to rope-a-dope him diplomatically, just like the North Koreans tried to do back in the day at the at the Singapore summit and at the Hanoi summit. And there really is no simpler answer to your question than all of the problems that we face from the Islamic Republic today. The terrorism, the internal repression and human rights violations, the cyber threat, the missile threat, the drone threat, the arms proliferation threat, the arms sales threat, the maritime instability threat, all of them would be made worse, not better, if this regime gets its hand on a nuclear weapon. And that's why the president cannot afford to take both the outgoing and the incoming one, an a la carte approach to the Iran threat and to the region.
Mm-hmm. It strikes me with Donald Trump giving Benjamin Netanyahu a free rein, a free hand, that we are sort of hoping that Israel does what we won't have to do. That if Israel can get in and make life difficult for Iran and create chaos there, then we don't have to worry about them so much. How much are we hoping that Israel acts as some kind of proxy for us?
Well, if we do come to that hope, I mean, I've heard between us, I mean, not between us because this is on radio, but for many years now, you've heard that sentiment whispered in various corners of D.C., in the left and the right, because as you know, there's these large swaths of the left and the right that want to forsake much of the world altogether and say, look inward, and they are inspired by, admittedly, the poor track record of the U.S. in many of these theaters. And so they'll say, look inward and outsource it to your partners. But I don't think we can afford to outsource U.S. national security, even to our exceptionally capable partner, like the Israelis in this region, because this is not a regional threat. This is a global threat. This is where, in the last question I answered, talking up the Europeans here, I'll dress them down politely. This is where the Europeans, treated for so long the the non-nuclear threats from Iran as an Arab issue or an Israeli issue or merely a Middle East issue. Lest we forget the Quds Force, the regime's terrorist apparatus, had its first foreign operations after the Iran-Iraq war in the former Yugoslavia, in Bosnia. This is a regime that has now moved ballistic missiles and drones onto the European continent. This is a regime that calls the Europeans political midgets, and every time the European posture slightly improves, they threaten, meaning the regime in Tehran threatens to extend the range of its ballistic missiles to put the large mass of the European continent within what is the largest ballistic missile arsenal in the Middle East. So I think that we have to see this through the global lens. It doesn't mean that Iran is a threat on the par of Russia or China, but it does mean understanding that the Islamic Republic occupies a critical nexus in this rising axis of authoritarians. And for us to outsource it to, an exceptionally capable partner would be, I would say, a gross oversight.
I'm talking to Ben Talablu, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. We are going to take a break. We're going to be back with more after this.
Get social with WCPT 820 and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WCPT 820.
WCPT 820, Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by Ben Talablu, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. We're talking about the Middle East. Benham, you alluded to something that I'd like to talk a little bit more. I don't know whether I want to call it a tendency or the fantasy that somehow we can isolate ourselves, that we, just let them figure out their own problems in the Middle East. We should really just focus on us. That has, generally speaking, not been an attitude that has really worked in the past. How prominent do you think that instinct to urge to isolate us is, and will it affect what we do or do not do in the Middle East?
Well, I certainly believe it is an attitude and a sentiment growing on the left, on the right, in some way a bit more organically now on the right, given the discourse on restraint, at least in the foreign policy space. But this is something where the American political spectrum is better understood as a circle, with various points meeting in the middle of that, or meeting on the ends of that circle, rather than just a straight line with left and right. And again, these are temptations and moments in American foreign policy when you do see this retreat, and then you do see a sudden event, a triggering event, Pearl Harbor, for example, or 9/11, for example, that moves the U.S. much more drastically in the exact opposite direction. And this is why I think a healthy conversation now about what are U.S. interests. Proponents of internationalism, proponents of a more muscular foreign policy that need not mean wars or conflicts, but the real vigorous defense of our views, values, and most importantly, interests, should be happening. And I think I call on all political leaders, left, right, center, what have you, to kind of resist this populist urge to be able to equate anything to just, oh, that's just another Iraq war hangover, or, oh, that doesn't matter, or just dismiss something as a so what. But I say also to be able to answer the so what, to be able to understand why something is or is not in the U.S. national interest. And I think this is a discourse-level thing that we need from our politicians or elected political leaders. These are people that we pay to put into office. We can't have them kind of pretend to lead the masses. We need them, though, to actually lead. And that means articulating a vision of why something is or is not in the U.S. national interest. And with respect, that's a bipartisan critique for me as someone who's been in D.C. just under 2 decades now watching this stuff.
Well, I don't know. I would think nearly 2 decades would give you enough perspective to weigh in on this, particularly since elected leaders kind of come and go. Well, let's talk about that. You know, give me a compare and contrast. The way you read the world 2 decades ago and the way you read it now.
The biggest thing, and I actually just came back from a tour across much of Western Europe where there is great angst as to what may come in the transatlantic relationship after January 2025. Be it not just on, obviously, the Iran issue, which I focus on deeply, but also, you know, Russia-Ukraine, which certainly has an Iran element, but also an element of great power competition on energy, on environment, on trade, on tariff, China, on cyber, you name it. There are concerns, again, as to how do we manage our competition with one another and our conflicts with one another, because this opposite or opposing world order that opposed us then, and we may not have seen it 2 decades ago, and certainly has manifested itself now, is looking to capitalize on our mistakes. So one big thing I see coming, kind of like a bus down the road, is that we don't have a mechanism, or we don't have the willingness or the tendency to compartmentalize our conflicts and our issues with one another. Unfortunately, I see the ability of our authoritarian adversaries to be able to do this quite well. They can downplay the differences and upplay the limited least common denominator. I think, first of all, we need to actually take a page, ironically, from these guys' books and to downplay the differences that we have and upplay the similarities, because we have quite a lot more similarities uniting us with our transatlantic partners than meets the eye. That's the first thing. The second thing is the big change culturally and politically here in D.C. is a real lack of confidence, a real lack of self-confidence. Maybe 2 decades ago, or perhaps just under, there was a real sense of belief in American optimism and American exceptionalism and American spirit. Now, I think when you do talk about these things, you are kind of scoffed at. I would say that given the lack of political accountability in some places in Washington, some might say the military establishment, some might say the political establishment, some might say the financial world, after certain crises happen, whether that's the financial crisis or the botched politics of the Iraq war or the Afghanistan withdrawal, for example, people, meaning the American people, and then in time their views reflected in their elected representatives, have not seen accountability. And when they haven't seen accountability after a crisis begot by people, they tend to shy away from the ideologies. And one of those ideologies was exceptionalism, and one of the derivatives of that exceptionalism was confidence. And so the real big thing I worry about is this lack of self-confidence that actually will force us to handicap ourselves at a time when we need that confidence. Not hubris, but we need the confidence, a real knowledge of what we view, what we value, what is in our interest, and what we can and what we cannot do.
Wow. Do you advise people in the government?
I know. Forgive me.
Who are the people who are listening to you? Who are the people who you believe will do things right, or who you respect?
In 12 years with this organization, our comments, again, and I do keep my, I wouldn't say advice, but when folks across the spectrum do ask me, I give my advice, particularly on the region and particularly on where things stand with Iran. I'm lucky that I do get quite a bit of bipartisan interest in that which I have to say, whether that's on the Hill in Congress, whether that's been different administrations, and then even whether that's been our friends across the pond in the transatlantic community. And look at some of the things that have been happening. At least I'll give you a very small example in one area that I focus on, which is, again, the countering the Iranian threat. It took Canada 12 years to do something the U.S. took 10 years to do. And that was the prescription or the designation of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. I had the honor of testifying virtually in Ottawa right before that decision was taken, also endorsing or supporting that decision. But I think if I've been able to garner even a modicum of respect, and now is the time to be humble about it, it's because I look at these things as more of a campaign than an operation. Things in politics are too often treated as a one-off. How can we best the other? But if you present someone, left or right, a Democrat or Republican, American or European, with a vision, with a plan, people will listen to you. And so, again, that's my charge to leaders today. I won't name names of who's been great and who's been a little bit lackluster on these issues.
I didn't ask for who was naughty. I only asked for the nice list.
Well, I won't. You can do process of elimination between naughty and nice, but I will say that I've been lucky to have an audience on both sides of the aisle, and also in the military world, in the academic world, and in the policymaking world. Now is the time for reason and rationality, not some of this hyperbole that we see going all around. I'm sorry I can't get more specific than that. But again, this is a nonprofit job where we have the luxury of speaking to all sides.
I love the fact that you said it should be a campaign, not an operation. You think of an operation as short-term, specific goal. You did it or you didn't. But a campaign is ongoing, an ongoing effort that potentially never stops. Do you think that we think that way?
We used to think that way. We used to think that way. We could. Absolutely, I still think the potential is there. I'm not going to lie to you and say we have to first dig out of the hole. Respectfully, we're not even at zero. We're a bit in the negative. We got to get out of the red and up into the positive game. But I do think we have the capability. The real question is not actually on so many of these fronts capability. The real question is one of will. Will you devote the time, the assets, the resources? And for many in Washington who, once they've seen this decline of will, they hedge on another resource, which is political capital. Will you devote the political capital to these problems? Or will you do this trend that we've seen folks take on for quite a while, which is to kick the can down the road? We may have an honest debate, Joan, about military spending, for example. But I think something that if, the incoming president is keen to show himself as standing with the military, we'll find ways to get around this continuing resolution business that has really hampered the modernization of our armed forces, because I think this is somewhere where the left and the right can agree with him, which is you want the biggest, baddest, most lethal army on the planet because you want to not have to ever use it. Mm-hmm. And God forbid we have to use it without giving it the resources.
Wonderful. Such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for spending so much time with us again today. I always feel a lot smarter after these hours are over. And it's a campaign to get me smarter. It's not an operation.
No.
So.
No, we just got to get you in the post-COVID space. Everything will be fine.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Joan. Such a pleasure.
Thank you. Ben Talablu, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. That is going to do it for me today. I will, of course, be back here tomorrow at 2 p.m. with many of my marbles. Maybe not all of them, but a good number of my marbles will be here. I'm going to be talking with our good friend John Shaw from the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute, and we're going to talk again to Bill Scher from Washington Monthly Magazine. Always good to have a conversation about the politics going on in Washington. Patty's going to be here in just a couple of minutes. She has Dwayne Kennedy as her co-host tonight. It should be a fun show. They're going to be talking to a couple of comedians, Joe Kilgallen and Matt McNeil. So stay tuned for that. It's coming up. And, of course, Richard Chu will be here tomorrow at 6 a.m. starting our day. He is going to be taking calls. He's going to be talking to a number of people. Karen Byrne of True Blue Politics podcast, DEI expert Dante King, George Chidi, politics and democracy reporter at The Guardian, Richard Chu here tomorrow at 6 a.m. And, of course, remember at 5 a.m., you get to hear Rick Smith. I've been keeping an eye on his wife Carol's recovery, and she continues to make progress after a nearly fatal traffic accident. Take care of yourself, my friends. Have a great evening, and I will see you tomorrow. Good night.